The war had begun long before the first shells fell upon the walls of Terra. For years, whispers of rebellion had drifted across the Imperium like a slow-moving plague, subtle at first, then unmistakable, then undeniable. By the time the skies above the cradle of humanity darkened with the shadows of traitor warships, every soul in the Imperium knew that the end, or the beginning of something far worse, was at hand. Even the wind of old Earth seemed to carry a strange heaviness, a quiet anticipation, as if the planet itself sensed the coming of its greatest trial. The Loyalists had worked tirelessly to prepare the defenses of the Imperial Palace. The walls of the outer palace, seamless adamantium laced with force fields and ancient technologies, rose like mountains forged from the bones of titans. Behind them, billions of citizens found refuge, while armies of Astra Militarum, Solar Auxilia, Custodians, and the remnants of loyalist space marine legions entrenched themselves. Every trench, every bastion, every balcony of fire seemed to hum with the calm, patient determination of warriors who knew they might not live long enough to see another dawn. Yet despite the tension that hung in the air, there was a strange, almost gentle stillness across the palace grounds. Thousands of banners fluttered on the ramparts, carrying with them prayers written by trembling civilian hands. Torchlight flickered along walkways and courtyards, reflecting faintly off-polished armor and watchful visors. From a distance, the palace looked almost peaceful, like a monument built not for war, but for remembrance. Deep within the inner palace, the custodian guard moved silently through the shadowed halls. Their golden armor glowed faintly beneath the light of ancient lumens, each of them a living embodiment of the Emperor's will. They spoke rarely, but when they did, their voices sounded calm, measured without fear. They were the Emperor's chosen, and nothing, not even the War Master's treachery, could shake their resolve. One of them, a veteran known simply as Archon Tyrael, stood watch upon the Eternity Gate. His armor bore faint scars from battles fought on distant worlds during the Great Crusade. He remembered marching beside the legions, watching the Emperor's dream unfold across the stars. Now, he guarded the entrance to that dream's last sanctuary. He listened to the faint rumble of artillery in the far distance, the first test volleys of a war that would soon swallow everything. He closed his eyes for a moment, steady and unshaken. "This is the last night of peace," a quiet voice murmured beside him. Archon turned to see his sister of silence standing nearby, shaven-headed, her expression unreadable, her presence muted like a whisper in the void. She carried no weapon in her hands, but moved with the same confidence as a veteran warrior. "It is," Archon said softly, "but not the last night of hope." She gave no reply, but her steady gaze seemed to approve. Throughout the palace, similar scenes unfolded. Solar Auxilia soldiers adjusted the seals on their void armor. Imperial Army regiments knelt in prayer, candles flickering around them. Tech priests strode between macro-cannon arrays, whispering Benheric blessings over loading hoppers filled with ammunition. Even the great titans of the Collegia Titanica, mountains of guns and steel, stood silent in their cradles, waiting for the order that would awaken them as gods of war. But amid these preparations, the one place where serenity truly lingered was atop the walls of the Imperial Palace. There, the view stretched beyond the horizon, revealing the sprawling cities of old Terra and the vast plains now filled with trenches and fortifications. Night had fallen across the world, yet the sky remained disturbingly bright. Far above, the wrath of Horus' fleet blotted out the stars, its vessels forming an iron constellation of betrayal. From the parapets, defenders watched the enemy ships with a mix of awe and dread. Some whispered the names of traitor legions, sons of Horus, world eaters, Death Guard, Emperor's children, each name carrying a weight of betrayal that felt almost impossible to bear. Others whispered prayers, their breath turning to mist in the cold air. Among them stood Captain Devrin Kael of the Imperial Fists, his yellow armor stained with dust from days spent reinforcing the walls. He was not a giant among Astartes, but he carried himself with a firm, unyielding strength that made soldiers instinctively look to him. His helm was clipped to his belt, and his stern face bore the calm concentration of a man who understood exactly what was coming. "The moment he fires," Devrin murmured, "the galaxy will never return to what it was." A nearby sergeant nodded, tightening his grip on his bolter. "Do you think Dorn will give us the order to open fire first?" "No," Devrin said quietly. "The War Master will not be denied his opening act." Almost as if summoned by his words, a tremor rippled through the air, deep, resonant, like distant thunder. The defenders straightened instantly. Above them, the massive enemy flagship, Vengeful Spirit, seemed to pulse with sudden energy that a beam of unnatural emerald light split the darkness, lancing downward toward Terra's atmosphere. The energy washed over orbital defense platforms, tearing two of them apart in the span of a heartbeat. Fire blossomed silently in the void, dozens of explosions like stars being born and dying all at once. The first blow had been struck. Across the palace battlements, no one spoke. Instead, every soldier felt something shift in their chest, a flicker of fear suppressed by a greater surge of duty. The warmth of the torches, the quiet prayers, the shimmering banners, all of it seemed to strengthen their resolve rather than weaken it. They felt connected to one another, bound by a cause greater than themselves. Devrin Kael slowly placed his helm over his head. The seal clicked shut with a soft hiss. Through the visor, the world took on a hardened tint, the glow of explosions above reflecting in his lenses like distant storms. "All units," his amplified voice called out, "stand ready. The Siege of Terra has begun." And in that moment, the defenders of humanity's throne accepted their fate. The night would not be quiet again for a very long time, but it would be remembered. The first hours of the assault fell upon Terra like a storm meant to break the world. Even through the layered walls of the Imperial Palace, the impact of orbital bombardments rumbled like rolling thunder. Lights flickered across the battlements as stray energy waves crashed against the defense grids. Dust drifted from ancient stone, disturbed for the first time in centuries. But the walls held, just as their creators intended. Beyond the palace perimeter, the plains were illuminated by the fire of descending drop pods. They fell from the sky in burning streaks, hundreds at a time, striking the ground with bone-shattering force. Most were empty decoys meant to overload defense cannons. A few carried the first wave of traitor formations, legionaries who once fought beside loyalists during the Great Crusade. Now they strode across the scorched earth with deliberate, sinister purpose, each step a rejection of the oath they had sworn to the Emperor. Inside the palace, alert sirens began to echo through the halls in deep, pulsing tones. Servitors hurried across corridors, their mechanical limbs clattering against marble floors. Cryptic warnings sounded through vox relays. Cold air slipped through ancient ventilation shafts as systems shifted into wartime configurations, locking down internal gates and activating dormant machine spirits. It was a transformation from sanctum to fortress, a transition every man and woman inside had hoped would never be necessary. In the strategium of the inner palace, Dorn stood before a towering hollow display of Terra. The pre-march of the Imperial fists was still as stone, his expression carved into that familiar mask of unyielding discipline. Around him, his commanders relayed data feeds and tactical projections, voices low and urgent. Dorn's golden armor carried faint etchings of Terran symbols, and beneath the gleam of its finish, small marks left by centuries of battle. He looked every bit the living bastion that humanity needed him to be. "The first wave probes the western trenches," one officer reported, his voice tight. Sons of Horus formations detected in full strength. Dorn's eyes narrowed, yet his tone remained as calm as ever. "They test our lines." His gaze flicked across updated projections. "They will find them unbroken." Another transmission crackled through. Titan signatures detected. Traitor engines mobilizing on the Pacific front. Dorn exhaled once, slow and steady. "Then our own god machines must answer." He turned to a tech priest Magos. Signal the Collegia Titanica. Prepare the Warmonger and Dominus Rex to engage. Yes, Lord Dorn, the Muggos intoned, his voice layered with vox distortion. Despite the scale of the assault, there was no panic in the strategium. No fear. Only a heavy, collected silence. A quiet forge from duty and the acceptance of unimaginable stakes. Every soul in that chamber knew the truth. If the palace fell, humanity would fall with it. Outside, the battle intensified. Subterranean batteries opened fire with concussive blasts, launching shells the size of transports. Macro cannons thundered against the descending waves of traitor forces. Thousands of lost guns created flickering mazes of red light as infantry regiments targeted advancing silhouettes. The air itself became harsh, thick with smoke and the metallic tang of weapon discharge. Within the steel maze of the western trenches, Captain Devrin Kael and his Imperial fists moved through the defensive lines, reinforcing key positions. Their amber-yellow armor stood out against the dark soil and flickering firelight. Servitors hauled crates of ammunition to emplacement bunkers, overseen by grim-faced officers who barked orders with practiced precision. The tension was palpable, but so was the discipline. No soldier spoke unnecessarily that a sudden quake shook the earth, sending dust cascading from overhead support beams. Devrin steadied himself, raising his helm toward the horizon. The darkness ahead shifted, then parted. Traitor Astartes stepped into view. They were massive, hulking silhouettes outlined by fire. Their armor still bore colors once honored, now desecrated by war bands and corruption. The sons of Horus led the vanguard, emerald plates charred and scarred. They moved with the confident stride of veterans who had fought in countless campaigns. Behind them came the brutal shapes of world eaters, already chanting their savage, guttural war cries. "Contact," Devrin said calmly, activating his squad vox. "Hold the line." Bolter fire erupted around him in bright flashes. Loyalist Marines braced themselves against the trench walls, returning fire with deliberate precision. The recoil of their bolters was rhythmic, almost steadying. Shells screamed through the air, detonating against advancing armor. The engagement was sudden and violent, a storm of sound and motion that tore apart the stillness of moments before. A world eater crashed into the trench line, chain axe roaring. The first loyalist he struck was lifted from his feet, armor splitting beneath the savage blow. But before the warrior could strike again, Devrin lunged, his power sword igniting in a flare of blue. Steel met energized edge, and sparks scattered across the mud. Their clash was brief but fierce. Devrin's blade drove through the traitor's pauldron, severing armor and muscle in one motion. The world eater collapsed, his blood steaming where it touched the chilled earth. More traitors poured into the trenches. The fight turned close and desperate. Marines grappled in narrow corridors, mud splashing beneath heavy boots. Sparks lit the shadows as power fists crashed into breastplates. In the distance, the roar of Titan cannons echoed through the earth, shaking the walls of the trench like a passing earthquake. Despite the growing pressure, the Imperial line did not break. Not by an inch. All along the Western Front, defenders fought with relentless resolve. Solar Auxilia squads coordinated with Astartes fire teams, each step backward immediately reclaimed. Artillery crews worked until their hands bled, refusing to abandon their guns even as enemy shells burst dangerously close. Every soldier fought with the knowledge that they were not protecting land or fortifications. They were protecting the last hope of the Imperium. Hours passed like this, each moment heavy and unforgiving. And yet, amidst the chaos, a sense of grim reassurance persisted. Every line held, every position reinforced, every traitor advance paid for in blood. As dawn crept faintly across the horizon, its light strained through the smoke-filled sky. It struggled to reach the earth, but where it did, it revealed the truth. The defenders still stood, exhausted, battered, but unbroken. Captain Devrin Kael surveyed the battlefield with slow, controlled breaths. The ground around him was littered with broken armor, shattered weapons, and the first bodies of many more to come. Yet the trenches remained in loyalist hands. The enemy presses harder, he murmured quietly to himself. But so do we. Far above, the vengeful spirit drifted through the clouds like a dark omen. Deep within its shadowed hull, the War Master watched the world below, knowing the siege was only beginning. And Terra, scarred, trembling, but defiant, prepared for the next blow. The hours after the first dawn of battle were deceptively quiet, the kind of silence that felt stretched thin, fragile, humming with tension. Smoke drifted lazily across the plains before the Imperial Palace, swirling in muted shades of gray and purple. The ground itself still radiated warmth from the enormous exchange of fire that had dominated the night, the soil scorched and torn open like old wounds. But the guns had not fallen silent because the enemy had relented. No, silence came because both sides were drawing breath before the next descent into brutality. Inside the palace, Medicae stations overflowed with wounded soldiers. The groans of pain blended with the clipped commands of surgeons and the whirring of mechanized auto-sutures. Imperial Army troopers lay on makeshift cots beside transhuman giants in cracked power armor. Apothecaries moved methodically between them, their white helms streaked with soot and blood. They worked with a calm urgency, knowing that each Marine they saved might mean a dozen more victories on the field. Above the Medicae galleries, Custodians walked in absolute silence, their golden armor untouched by hesitation. They observed everything: wounded fleeing mortality, officers rushing reports, servitors cleaning corridors, and their presence alone seemed to steady the heartbeat of the palace. To see a Custodian was to remember why Terra still stood in the strategium. Robledorn was already at the center of the hollow tables, never having left his post. His armor showed no sign of rest, neither did his face. He studied, shifting tactical markers with the expression of a craftsman evaluating the integrity of a fortress wall, seeing flaws invisible to others. His voice, when he spoke, was calm yet edged in steel. "They're massing artillery on the Pan-Pacific Flats," Dorn said. "This is not a probing attack. Horus intends to break our lines there." A senior Solar Auxilia commander stepped forward. "Our battalions can reinforce the flats within the hour." "No," Dorn responded, shaking his head. "They would not survive the crossing. Horus will bombard the flats before he sends his infantry. If we move now, we feed them to his guns." He tapped a sequence on the display. "We hold our positions, and we let him advance into the killing grounds." There was a moment of hesitation, fleeting but present. Dorn noticed it. He leaned over the table slightly. "If we break," he said, his voice low, "there is no retreat. There is no fallback position. Terra loses everything the moment this palace falls. And so every decision, every sacrifice is made with that in mind." No one questioned him again. Outside the walls, the Pan-Pacific Flats were a hellscape preparing to be worse. The terrain had been reshaped by macro-cannon bombardments into jagged trenches and molten rivers of glassy rock. Loyalist units tasked with holding the perimeter dug in with machine precision, constructing bunkers beneath barely cooled earth. Captain Devrin Kael stood with his imperial fists at the forefront of the defenses. His armor was battered, the yellow surface lined with soot and impact marks. He moved among his squad, offering silent nods and brief gestures of approval. Words were unnecessary. Every Marine knew what was coming. He paused near a fortified emplacement where Solar Auxilia troops were adjusting the calibration of a heavy loss cannon. One soldier, helmet removed, wiped sweat from her brow with a trembling hand before noticing the Astartes captain watching her. She stiffened instantly. "Steady your breathing," Devrin said, his tone unexpectedly gentle beneath a metallic Vox filter. "Fear is not a flaw. It is a warning. Listen to it, but do not obey it." The soldier nodded, swallowing hard, her face tightening with renewed focus that a distant tremor rolled across the flats, the sound low and bone-deep. Another followed, closer. The rumbling grew louder, steadier, until dust began to vibrate along the ridges of defensive trenches, And then they appeared. The Death Guard marched first, their pale armor stained with chemical rot. They advanced in perfect silence, not out of discipline, but out of something worse, habitual dread calm. Behind them came corrupted armor columns, tanks exhaling fumes thick and corrosive. Plague-burst engines rolled forward like rusted juggernauts. Following them were the thralls of the War Master, mortal soldiers twisted by months serving the traitor legions. Their armor was mismatched, scavenged, and desecrated with symbols etched in blood. Their numbers were a tidal wave of desperation and fanaticism. But the most devastating shapes were still behind the infantry lines, towering silhouettes moving between the drifting smoke plumes, traitor titans. Their footfalls shook the ground like distant thunder. Their carapaces bore the colors of corrupted legios, once noble engines, now enslaved to the War Master's command. Their weapon arrays hummed and glowed with artillery-grade energy. Devrin Kael exhaled slowly. "The enemy commits their titans," he said over Vox on the ramparts of the palace. The drums of the Collegia Titanica thundered in answer, awakening loyalist engines that had slept under Terra for generations. Vast gates parted, and the massive forms of loyal titans stepped forward, their visors glowing with awakened machine spirits. The air crackled with energy. The battlefield shook under the first exchange of titan fire. A lance of searing light carved across the horizon, blowing apart an entire ridge where traitor infantry marched. The answering strike from a traitor warlord titan vaporized a bunker, shattering the earth and sending shockwaves across the flats. Between these towering monsters, infantry pushed forward relentlessly. The trenches erupted into chaos once again. The fourth day of the siege began beneath a sky that no longer resembled Terra's own. The atmosphere was choked with drifting embers and ash, stained by the smoke of burning cities and the exhaust trails of endless dropships. What little sunlight pushed through cast an eerie, red-tinted glow over the battlefield, as though the world itself bled from wounds too deep to heal. No one could remember the last time the sky had been clear, but at this point, it hardly mattered. All that mattered was holding the line. Within the Imperial Palace, the toll of war was beginning to show even on the strongest. Marble floors were tracked with mud, soot, and dry blood. Walls that once held luminous artistry now bore cracks from distant bombardments. Servitors dragged broken blast shields across corridors while soldiers huddled over ration tins, their faces hollowed by exhaustion. But despite the fatigue, discipline held firm. Terra was all that remained. There was nowhere to fall back to, no distant fortress waiting for retreat. Every soldier knew this, and it forced a stillness into their hearts that was almost sacred. In the inner sanctum of the strategium, Rogel Dorn stood before updated projections of the evolving battlefield. His armor was dented and scratched, stained with smoke from multiple inspections of frontline positions. Yet he carried himself with the same unwavering posture, shoulders broad, head high, every motion deliberate. He studied the changing patterns of enemy movements as though reading the grain of wood or the edge of stone that a custodian stepped forward, speaking in a low, respectful tone. "My lord, enemy reinforcements are landing in the Pan-Pacific theater. Heavy infantry and siege armor." "And ours?" Dorn asked quietly. "Minimal. Those who still stand cannot be spared from their current posts." Dorn inhaled once, deep and controlled. "Then we will adapt." His eyes tracked lines of red spreading across the holomap like cracks in a foundation. "Horus is tightening the noose. He looks for a point where we falter." "Will he find one?" the custodian asked. Dorn looked at him, voice carrying a tone that was both unyielding and weary. "He may, but if he does, he will pay dearly for every breath it cost us." Outside the palace grounds, the battle grew darker with each passing hour. The Pan-Pacific Flats had become a labyrinth of shattered ruins, broken titans, and rivers of blackened mud. The stench of promethium and scorched metal hung over the plains like a permanent fog. Even movement felt heavy, as though the ground itself resisted every step taken upon it. Captain Devrin Kael knelt beside a shattered trench wall, his armor smeared with grime and streaked with enemy blood. His squad gathered around him, battered but resolute. They had fought 3 engagements since dawn and were preparing for a 4th. The air vibrated with distant Titan footsteps, each thundering impact rattling loose stones from the trench walls. Above them, aircraft streaked across the sky, loyalist and traitor alike, locked in duels of flame and contrails that a rumble shook the ground, more intense than mere artillery. One of the Solar Auxilia officers scrambled to Devrin's side. "Captain, enemy forces are regrouping to the east. Sons of Horus elites. We believe they're preparing a breakthrough attempt." Devrin rose to his full height, power armor groaning softly. "Then we meet them head-on." He turned to his marines. "Form defensive pattern Delta. No ground is surrendered without a wound. No retreat. No hesitation." His brothers acknowledged with firm nods. The attack came moments later, a sudden collapse of silence, replaced by explosions that tore the earth open. Sons of Horus Terminators advanced through smoke, their armor bearing the sea-green sheen of a legion once trusted with the greatest glories. Now, they were avatars of treachery, moving with the cold intent of executioners. Behind them marched mortal auxiliaries corrupted by chaos, chanting in warped voices. They carried weapons scavenged from loyalist dead, their faces smeared with ash and symbols etched in shaking hands that Devrin's bolter barked in steady rhythm, each shot purposeful, each impact sending traitors collapsing into the mud. Imperial fists along the trench line returned fire with deadly efficiency. But as the Terminators closed in, bolter rounds began to glance off their reinforced plating as a massive shape emerged through smoke. The towering form of a Reaver-class traitor titan. Its weapons glowed with murderous heat, its silhouette outlined by the fires of destruction. The battlefield seemed to bend beneath its presence. "Titan fire incoming!" a voice shouted over the Vox. Devrin braced himself. The Titan's massive cannon unleashed a beam of scorching energy that carved through the trenches like a scythe. Entire sections of earth vaporized. Soldiers were flung through the air like broken dolls. The world became a hurricane of. The 5th night of the siege descended like a heavy curtain, cloaking Terra in a darkness broken only by fires burning across the plains and the flickering of distant explosions. The air itself felt heavy, thick with dust, ash, and the lingering echo of screams carried away by the wind. The world had become a single, unending battlefield. No one slept. No one rested. Terra endured because it had no other choice. Inside the Imperial Palace, tension grew like a pressure building behind stone walls. The wounded filled entire wings of the fortress. Chaplains walked slowly between rows of cots, whispering blessings, offering quiet words to soldiers whose hands trembled. Medici teams worked until their bodies threatened to collapse. Even the Custodians, normally unshakable, wore new scars upon their gleaming armor. Rogel Dorn stood at the center of it all, tireless, unsmiling, calculating every possible way the next hours might go wrong. He reviewed reports with a precision bordering on painful. Traitor forces were pushing harder on every front. Their movements showed coordination unlike anything seen since the start of the siege. Horus was tightening the cord, and Dorn knew that their lines could not hold forever, that a low hum filled the strategium as new data streamed in. One of the commanders approached Dorn with grim urgency. "My lord, enemy breakthrough detected in the Helios ridges. Sons of Horus and Iron Warriors leading the assault. They have already breached 2 major trenches." Dorn exhaled slowly. "They will aim for the Saturnine Gate." His gaze hardened. "That is where Horus hopes to break us. And if he does, he won't." Dorn cut him off gently, but firmly. Still, even he knew the truth pressing against his thoughts. The traitor legions were gathering for their greatest push yet. He could feel the shift in the air, in the rhythm of the tremors shaking the walls, in the sudden increase in enemy activity across scattered fronts. The War Master's hand was moving closer to the heart of Terra with each assault. Outside the palace, the war was escalating into madness. Thunderhawks screamed overhead, trailing smoke as anti-air batteries crippled their wings. The ground trembled constantly, as if Terra itself groaned beneath the weight of the armies clashing upon its surface. The sky was alive with the glow of orbital bombardments, huge citadels of fire drifting down through polluted clouds and could see the Helios ridges. Captain Devrin Kael stood upon a mound of shattered stone, surveying the smoldering battlefield below. His armor was blackened, dinted, and flecked with the blood of friend and foe alike. His bolter was nearly empty, and his sword vibrated faintly from the energy still coursing through it. His marines gathered around him, breath heavy, armor cracked, but still ready. "Captain," one marine rasped, "the traitors push again. They come with engines. Heavy ones." A rumble echoed through the valley, deep and metallic. Iron Warriors' siege tanks rolled forward, their hulls layered with spikes and reinforced plating. Their guns glowed red from constant firing. Behind them marched phalanxes of sons of Horus, moving with deliberate, disciplined steps. "Helios' command is gone," another marine said quietly. "Overrun." Devrin closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in despair, but in acknowledgement. "Then we hold here," he said. "We hold until Dorn's reinforcements arrive. And if they don't, then we hold anyway." The enemy assault struck like an avalanche. Siege guns roared, collapsing ridge walls and burying entire squads beneath avalanches of stone. Heavy bolter rounds tore through loyalist armor. Explosions lit the valley in a constant strobe of fury. Imperial Army regiments fought to the last man, refusing to yield even as they were torn apart. That Devrin's squad met the first wave head-on. His power sword cleaved through the helm of a traitor. Bolter fire thundered around him. Chain's words clashed with shrieks of metal on metal. The air was thick with the scent of burning promethium and the bitter tang of exposed ceramite. Through the chaos, Devrin saw a massive figure approaching, a Terminator champion of the Sons of Horus, clad in ornate, sea-green armor marked with the Eye of Horus. The traitor moved with murderous purpose, his chain fist revving, sparks dripping from its teeth. Their clash shook the ground. Devrin blocked the first blow, but the impact nearly shattered his arm. He retaliated with a slash that carved deep into the champion's chest plate. The champion roared, the sound muffled inside his helm, and swung again. Their struggle felt eternal. Two warriors who once fought under the same banner, now locked in a duel that symbolized the entire war. With a final surge of strength, Devrin plunged his power sword through the champion's throat joint. The massive traitor collapsed, shaking the earth as he fell. But there was no time to breathe. The line was collapsing. "Captain," a marine shouted. "We can't hold much longer." Devrin turned to respond, only to feel the ridge shudder beneath his feet. The enemy tanks surged forward. Sons of Horus stormed into the trenches. Iron Warriors tore through defensive bastions like machines of living metal. Devrin saw the truth. The Helios ridges were lost. He activated his Vox. "All units, fall back to secondary lines. Delay the enemy. Keep them from the Saturnine gate." "Captain, what about you?" The final day of the siege dawned with a sky so black it seemed to swallow the horizon. Even the faint red glow of smoldering fires did little to pierce the darkness, leaving the battlefield bathed in a cold, unnatural twilight. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, promethium, and blood. Every surface of Terra seemed scarred beyond recognition. Broken titans lay in craters, shattered vehicles burned along the ridges, and the plains themselves were churned into mud and ash by the unrelenting tide of war. Inside the Imperial Palace, the defenders were near exhaustion, yet no one faltered. The Custodians patrolled corridors now lined with Medicae cots, their presence a living shield of calm amidst chaos. Servitors dragged ammunition and supplies across debris-strewn halls. Chaplains whispered prayers over fallen soldiers even as bolter fire rattled through distant chambers. Rogel Dorn remained at the Strategium, the weight of the Imperium pressing down on his broad shoulders, unmoving except for his eyes, which constantly scanned the constantly shifting projections of enemy movements. "Warriors of the Imperium," Dorn said quietly, almost to himself, This is the moment they hoped for. Let them come. We hold, or all is lost. The first signs of Horus's ultimate assault appeared on the horizon. Massive warp rifts tore through the battlefield, bleeding nightmarish light and shadow into reality. Demonic forms stepped through, hulking shapes that warped perception, their very presence radiating despair. The sons of Horus and other traitor legions advanced with renewed fervor, their movements unnaturally coordinated, as if guided by some malevolent intellect beyond mortal comprehension. Captain Devrin Kael moved through the secondary defensive lines, his squad battered but unbroken. Their faces were pale beneath visors streaked with soot and blood, eyes wide but resolute. Even as they took position, the ground trembled with approaching titans, loyalist and traitor alike, their massive forms moving across the scarred plains like mountains on legs. A towering warlord-class traitor titan appeared first, its massive cannons igniting in a scream of heat and fire. Bolts of energy struck the trench lines, scattering soldiers and tearing through fortifications. Loyalist titans answered, launching volleys that shook the earth, their own weapons producing trails of molten debris. The clash of these colossal engines created shockwaves that flattened terrain and sent tremors through Terra itself. Devrin led his squad into the heart of the chaos, bolter fire cutting through advancing traitors, chains words igniting in streaks of blue and red. Each swing of his power sword met the corrupted ceramite of traitor champions. Sparks and blood mingled with the sulphurous haze of explosions, the battlefield a blur of movement and sound. Yet even this was only the prelude. A new surge of enemy forces moved from the warp rift itself, demons of unimaginable size and form. They swept through the ranks of loyalists, shredding men and machines with claws, talons, and psychic violence. The sky itself seemed to scream as the warp energy twisted gravity and perception, throwing soldiers off balance, tearing the very air apart with a high-pitched resonance.